seated. And he always is. Just his influence here, and as Robert prayed, in such a short time, he made such an impact. It's just amazing to see what one person can do. And Nehemiah is certainly a case of that exact idea. Nehemiah was leading a group of Israelites who essentially could have gone either way. In the beginning of Nehemiah, he's hearing about what's going on in Jerusalem, and what he's hearing is it is almost literally a dumpster fire. There is no stone left upon another. Everything has been burned. Jerusalem is a shadow of its former self, and if by shadow you mean nothing at all. It is terrible, there is no walls, and things are not going well. And so the question is, how would God's people respond to adversity? Now, Nehemiah steps up, and there's a lot to learn from him and his leadership, but our lesson this morning isn't about Nehemiah specifically, it's about the people as a whole. And so after he's able to make some ground, after he speaks to the king and he prays to God for intervention that God gives, and he's able to go back and start the process of rebuilding Jerusalem, we say, there it is. If you pray to God and he will answer your prayer with a yes, then everything's going to go great. And that's sometimes true, but oftentimes that's just the beginning of the story. In fact, Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 1 shows it's not even the beginning. They were kind of just halfway. In verse 1, now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. The thing about Nehemiah in verse 1 is he's a great leader. And the people are trying to do a great thing. But sometimes there's just people out there who are trying to get you. In verse 1, Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, and he was angry and greatly enraged. Now, why? Why would someone who really shouldn't have anything to do with the Jews and their work be greatly enraged and even care? Well, because if their walls were up, he would now have lost his unfettered access. He would lose control, potentially power. A new people would come and be their own people, and they have their own laws and their own taxation, and basically his life would be disrupted. And I think it's easy for us to look at adversity and to say, well, there's always people out there looking to get us. There's people who just want us to fail. And that could be. Sometimes there are people like that. But other times the world is just tough because people live for one person and one person only. You know who that is? Me, myself, and I. And the key to this adversity is found in Nehemiah's response. Now, in verse 4, he says something we're very uncomfortable with. He says, hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Now, in Romans chapter 12 and verse 9, Paul would tell the Christians there, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Now, I've shared this before, that I was growing up in a house that was not allowed to use the word hate. And so I learned that abhor, when Paul says abhor what is evil, that's strong hate. And so I said, well, can I say that I will abhor that? And my mom said, yes. Now, to be honest, that took all the fun out of it when she said, yes, I could say that. And she was right. I asked her later, why did you do that? She goes, because I knew you would never say it. It's a strong hatred. We're uncomfortable because what Nehemiah does is he takes the hatred of Sanballat, he understands that what's going on, and he doesn't just say, God, take care of it. Notice in verse 4, turn back their taunt on their own heads, give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. We're not comfortable with that, and part of that is we lack the fundamental element that will get us through adversity. Trust that God is in control. a real relationship with God that will persevere through any challenge or challenger who seeks to upset us from the outside. And so that's the truth of the matter. When we look at Nehemiah chapter 4, the Israelites, the captives, the remnants who had returned from captivity, were given the challenge to arise and build. And they did this despite the fact that people were actively plotting against them. Now notice in verse 6, they actually started building the wall, and it's this halfway that's the real problem. The wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. But in verse 7, it's no longer just Sanballat. And it's no longer just verse 3, Tobiah the Ammonite. It's Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites. And once again in verse 7, it's that word that's so peculiar. They were very angry. Sometimes the world is upset with progress. It's upset with Christians standing up for what is right. And so you can look at this lesson on a variety of planes. You can look at it on a practical level, what to do when the world seems to be closing in on me. You can look at it on a theoretical level. What do we do when Christians are being persecuted on an ideological level? When the world is saying Christianity is something to be hated. Christians are failures. Christians are ignorant. What do we do? Well, the first thing that we learn here is verse 6. Build anyway. Build the wall. Keep on doing what you're supposed to be doing. Don't let what other people are doing throw you off. And you see, that's what happens. In verse 8, they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. So in verse 9, what did they do? We prayed to our God and set as a protection against them a guard day and night. The fact is, this was intimidating. We read a story like this in the Old Testament and we go, God's in charge. They're struggling, but this is when God answers prayers directly. He smites people. That's why Nehemiah would say, turn back their taunt on them, make them be plundered. God's just going to snap his fingers, and he's going to take care of the problem. That's not the way the Jews actually felt about it. Notice in verse 10, and notice perhaps we feel this way sometimes. In verse 10, in Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. And at that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So where is some of this fire? Where is some of this adversity coming from? Yes, Sanballat and Tobiah, that's undoubtedly true. But in verse 10, it is Jews who are saying, this is too much. In verse 12, it was the Jews who came from all directions and 10 times demanded, you must return to us. Why? They were intimidated. They didn't feel like this was a battle that they would win. Well, they weren't set up for victory in this battle. There were no walls. That's what they were trying to build. There was no protection. There was nothing going for them other than faith in God and perhaps faith in their godly leader, Nehemiah. There was nothing to trust in. There was no reason to have some sort of faith that this adversity would pass and they'd be okay. And so I pose the question similar to what we studied in our Revelation class this morning. Have you ever found yourself thinking, I just can't do this? The world is out to get me. My neighbor, my coworker, my friend at school, people are turning against me. I can't do it. It's bad enough when verse 11 says, our enemies say they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. It's bad enough when enemies come for us. But the second struggle is when Satan is able to speak directly to us in our souls and convince what I call friendly fire to commence. In verse 10 and 12, it was fellow Jews who said, you can't do this. It's really hard to do the right thing in a world full of enemies who are telling you, we will get you if you do, and allies who say, you aren't good enough. You can't do it. You won't be successful. How do we respond when that happens? Ultimately, it has to be faith and trust in God. Notice in verse 13, the practical element. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall and open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. And from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. Truth is, as we've read through Nehemiah chapter 4 now, you have the people who have a problem. And the problem is there are people out to get them. But beyond just the people out to get them, sometimes the environment is frightening. There's outside invasion. There's inside discouragement. And then there's a choice. Will I do what Nehemiah commanded in verse 14, to remember the Lord who is great and awesome? Do I have a faith to say what's said in verse 20, our God will fight for us? Or will I listen? Will I listen to those who say, you can't do it. It's too much. Return. Be safe. Punt. It's okay. What will I do? God calls us to do difficult things. He calls us to take up our cross daily and follow after Jesus. That is a life of daily denial. The first part of Luke 9:23 is let everyone deny himself and take up his cross and follow after me. I have to choose every day, am I willing to put myself last to please my God first? Because that's the only way we'll get through. And it's easy to be, sky is falling. I can be like CNN or Fox or any of the news stations and tell you how terrible the world is. We know that. But we don't have to dwell there. We don't have to live there. Where should our focus be? Where do we live? Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Know that our God will fight for us, not in some vindictive way, not in a God, make all my enemies suffer, but in a Jesus suffered for me way. And so the battle's been won. I can make it through this moment. And so 4 points, and the lesson will be yours this morning. How do we overcome adversity in our life, knowing it strikes from different directions, from the outside, from the inside, and even from the depths of our souls? Number 1, pray. And pray again. Notice how many times prayer comes up just in Nehemiah chapter 4. First of all, in verse 4, we have what Nehemiah said, hear, O our God, for we are despised. Verse 5, do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. Regardless of the difficulty of him calling on sin to be unforgiven, he is praying to God. Nehemiah has a relationship with God that says, when there is a problem, I go to God. And so I have to ask myself a very simple question. When something is wrong, what is my instinct? Because we only have one first instinct. We only have one first go-to call. It's interesting. For everyone, it's different. Sometimes it's a parent. Sometimes it's a friend. Sometimes it's a sibling. But we all have someone we call when you're at the breaking point, when you don't know what else to do. I wonder how many times for me, my first call isn't prayer. Because if it's not, I have to question why. And it's not necessarily sinful to call someone for help and pray second. That's not what I'm saying. But shouldn't our instinct as Christians be to face something good and be thankful immediately? Or to face something tough and pray also immediately? Again, in verse 9, after the enemies have made their plan to come together and fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion, we collectively prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Over and over and over in the Old Testament and the New Testament, when Christians were against the wall, when Israelites were against enemies, what did they do? They prayed. They prayed as individuals. They prayed as a collective. And that's something I think I could do better at. I think we as a people can do better at being people of prayer. I don't mean making time to pray. We need to do that. That's difficult because our days get really busy and all of a sudden we find ourselves nodding off at night for the night-night prayers. And it's okay to pray at night. It's good to pray before we go to sleep. But sometimes we've had the whole worldly day before we think to stop and pray. Doesn't that seem like perhaps a bit of a priority jumble? But what about with each other? It's easy and good to pray on a Sunday morning. I appreciated Robert's prayer. I appreciated the prayers for the Lord's Supper today. It's a good thing to pray together. It's a good thing to pray in what we call corporate worship. Love it. We need more of it. We need prayer services, just like we do song services and Bible study and Bible readings. These are all great. But how often do we make time to pray, not just in a prayer service or in a prayer get-together, but with a couple households? We have all the technology in the world where we can see videos from anywhere. We can leave messages and emails. How often do we say, will you, on the other end of this phone, pray with me today? Why not? Can we be honest? We feel awkward. I've shared this before. I don't like asking for help in a variety of ways. Kashka had one rule with me at theme parks, because occasionally we'd have to ask a question, and I don't like to ask the question, and so Kashka would go do it, and she said, okay, I will ask the question for you, but you can't walk off while I ask the question, pretending like you're not with me. And I mostly followed that rule. And she would ask the question. You know, the truth is, we all have different pressure points of what's awkward and what's not. Prayer should not be such an obstacle. And it is, so we need to deal with it. We need to be assured that it matters, that we make a difference, and we press through the awkwardness, because this is what Christians do. Christians follow Christ. We pray to God, the Father of Jesus. Look in Luke chapter 18. In Luke chapter 18, what we're called to do is to pray, and to pray persistently. And we get this from a worldly point of view, and this is exactly what Jesus does. He uses a worldly, flawed example to show how powerful and good our perfect God is. In Luke 18 and verse 1, and he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. Now for a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Here is a woman, a widow, in fact, in verse 3, who comes before this respected man, this respected judge. And what does the judge do? Well, he refuses, but he eventually relents. Why? Because of what a good man he is? No. Jesus goes to great pains to say, here's a flawed man. In fact, how is he described? Well, in verse 4, he said, though I neither fear God nor respect man. Okay? Not a good man, not good motive. God sees this, he's aware of that. But nonetheless, this flawed judge says, for the sake of getting her off of my back, I will give her the justice she seeks. Why would Jesus do that? Well, remember, he told us in verse 1 what the purpose of the parable is. I love it when Jesus does this, because I'm often like the disciples. We're like, why is Jesus saying this? Why is he talking about seeds again? Why is he talking about plants? I don't get it. What is he doing? Verse 1, he told us very clearly, Luke does, to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. Well, how does hearing about a selfish judge help me always pray and not lose heart? Because my God's not like that judge. He's far better. And if the selfish judge will hear the prayer and act on it, what will my God do? Verse 6, the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. Will not God give justice to his elect? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Our God wants to hear from us. He wants our instinct to be to talk to him. And so to overcome adversity, we need to realize we are in a battle with people who are outgunned and outmanned, because we're with God. Our God will fight for us, not in the sense that he will drop all the weapons of war. He might do that, he might not. But that my God is aware of what is happening, and he will back his people. Luke 18 calls them his elect. Christ calls them and us brothers. What a blessing that is, to be a child of God, to have that blessing. And so we learn from so many wonderful examples around us who are prayer warriors and Bible students, and that's great. But what do we do with it? It's great to pray quietly, but it's also better to pray together some as well. We need to be people whose instinct is to not care about awkwardness and to eliminate that. Cahaba Heights as a church should be a group of people who realize God is in control, he wants to hear from us, and we stop and pray. What a blessing that would be. Can you imagine? As Paul writes about the churches in Thessalonica and Ephesus, if he talked about Cahaba Heights and said, I know that y'all have a heart to pray. I don't think he'd say y'all because of the time and place, but you understand my point. What a blessing that would be. And that needs to start with me as an individual. If my eye is on God, if I'm setting my mind on things above, not on things on the earth, that's going to help me overcome adversity in front of my eyes. The second thing is I need to be really honest and be aware of danger time. I find the most notable part of Nehemiah chapter 4 isn't the enemies, and it isn't even the friendly fire from the people of Judah or the Jews who say 10 times, return to us, give up. That's noteworthy, and that's important. I think verse 6 catches my attention the most. Of all that's going on, of all the obstacles to clear, they're finally building the wall. And make no mistake, this is years of groundwork just to get the first brick upon brick of this wall. And so we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. I think one of two things happens when we get the wall halfway built. When we're doing pretty good, we're making some progress. We know we're not perfect. We know we're not completed. But we also know we're not at scratch. We're not at zero. Two things afflict us. Number one, the thought of the people of Judah. This is too much. We can't overcome it. We've put in all this effort, and we just can't finish. And on the other hand, there's the side that says, we've been doing pretty good. Look at all the good things we're doing. Look at how good things are. And you know who loves that? Satan does. The devil loves for us to look at our life and say, man, I am doing good at this. Pride comes before the fall. Halfway is one of the most dangerous times because we either give up before we get to the end, we grow weary, which we're warned against in Galatians 6, or we pat ourselves on the back and we sit down. We need to be aware that danger time is all of the time. There's challenges at each and every stage. There's challenges at the beginning, there's challenges in the middle, and there's challenges right at the edge too. And so I need to take scope of my life and say, where am I? What are my challenges? Because one of the things that happens in prayer is we say, I just don't know what to say. I don't know that I could pray more than 3 or 4 times a day or more than 30 minutes at a time because I don't know what else to talk about with God. Well, I got a lot going on. I don't seem to have a problem talking about Florida football. I can talk a lot about that, and it's pretty depressing, I'll be honest. But I have a lot of thoughts. Why do I struggle to pray? Maybe because in danger time, I don't see it that way. I see it as actually a time of good. And I say, thank you. And I say, help me with this one little problem, and then I move on. And Satan wants desperately for us to leave our doors unlocked and the alarms off. We need to be people who are watching, who are aware that temptation is out there. Notice what Paul would say in Ephesians 4. Look with me there, in Ephesians chapter 4. Where's your danger zone? Is it with family? Is it busyness? Is it idleness? Another warning in Scripture. We're people as a culture who love busyness. We pride ourselves in being busy, so idleness is less of a threat, but that's certainly a New Testament warning as well. But in Ephesians 4:26, notice, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Now, this is in the midst of a passage beginning in verse 1 of chapter 4 on through chapter 5, especially verse 1 and 2, that talks about our Christian walk. To walk in a manner worthy of our calling, to walk as Christ did, rather than to be darkened in our hearts and minds like the Gentiles in verse 17 and 18. So what do we do with that? Give no opportunity to the devil. I need to do some self-evaluation. This is hard. I don't like self-evaluation because I know myself. And I know myself has so many flaws. But we also need to be aware that those flaws are exactly what Satan wants to exploit. And when it comes to eternity, when it comes to adversity, what's on the line isn't what Sanballat and Tobiah are doing, it's what God thinks of me. Am I doing the best I can or am I not? Am I praying? Am I studying? Am I serving? Am I someone who has a lot of knowledge but doesn't serve? Am I maybe someone who serves a lot but refuses to know more of Scripture? We need to work on that. We need to be people who are full of the Word and full of doing good things first. We need to be aware Satan's out there. There are opportunities we're giving to him. We find opportunities for the things that matter most to us. Right? When there's a game on, I find time to sit down and watch it or to listen to it. I've been driving back on interstates and had access to football games on a phone because it matters to me. How much does staying away from sin matter to me? How much does it matter to you? What lengths are we willing to go to make sure we are ready for Judgment Day? Adversity comes and we get caught up in the here and now. We need to be worried about the hereafter, the one judgment that actually matters. And so what do we do in the here and now? We understand on a big picture, of course I need to do the right thing. Of course I need to pray more. Of course I need to be a better servant. I know that. But how can I overcome adversity now? There's people coming for me today. There's people discouraging me now. So what do I do? Well, notice in Nehemiah chapter 4, Nehemiah didn't just, quote unquote, pray. He didn't just say, all right, well, we'll sit down and God will take care of it. He's going to work his miracle. This wall's going to be finished. If he can separate the Red Sea, he can finish this wall. If he can give victory over Jericho, he can give us victory over Sanballat and Tobiah. These guys are nothing compared to Jericho. No, verse 13, he had a specific plan for them. In the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows. In verse 16, from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah. Verse 17, those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. You know what Nehemiah did? He made a specific plan for their specific weakness. This is why the self-evaluation matters. Why do I have to do this difficult, depressing thing and think about my flaws? Why do I have to think about Satan being out there? Because I need to make a plan for it. Too often we just say, okay, well, I'm doing great or I'm doing terrible, and we leave it. We're called to more than that. It's often said, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it what percentage? Aim at nothing, you'll hit it every single time. I have to ask myself, have I set goals for myself as a Christian to be better at anything? You name what the Christian ethic is: holiness, righteousness, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, being a peacemaker, being merciful, being poor in spirit. I know these are good goals, but have I ever set a specific plan? Now, I love the idea of talking about specific plans in January because that's when everyone has a specific plan, and usually the plans are all for the same goal, right? We're going to lose some weight. And what is the worst time of year to be in a gym? January. Because everyone has a plan of a goal, they want to lose weight. What happens in February? It's about half. And March, April, May, everyone's gone, except the people who were there in November, December anyway. Because we all have great goals. But the question is, do we have a specific plan to make that goal a reality? And do we have the discipline to actually practice on it? Look at me in Proverbs. We see several Proverbs about this. Proverbs 21. Proverbs 21 and verse 5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. If we say treasures in heaven is what we're trying to lay up, and we make no specific plan for that, can we be successful? When we aim at nothing, we'll hit it every time. Sometimes I'm frustrated with my growth as a Christian, and I look and realize I'm not setting any goals for my growth as a Christian. I just have aspirations. Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. Now, the Jews may have taken this differently. But maybe you're like me and you go, really? I'm going to be compared to the ant? The ant is the person who's going to be my goal? That should be a bit of a humbling lesson for us. But what are we to be like the ant in? Verse 6, considering her ways, being wise. Because verse 8, she prepares in summer and gathers food in harvest. This is contrary. The opposite of an ant would be lying there, being a sluggard, sleeping too much, slumbering far too long. Sometimes as Christians, we're in slumber instead of working. I have to say, I want to take a moment from the lesson and just say thank you to everyone who's done so many kind things for Koshka and I the past few weeks. I don't think anyone here has a problem necessarily with being a sluggard. We have been overwhelmed by cards and calls and prayers. I just want to say thank you. But the threat is still out there for us each and every day to have other weaknesses that aren't as public. Weaknesses that are private, weaknesses that some people know, weaknesses that everybody knows. Maybe they're completely public. We are called to do the hard things, which is to sacrifice and serve. That is that Luke 9:23 principle, to deny ourselves daily, pick up our cross and follow after him. Part of that self-denial is to realize I have got to cut out the areas of my life that the devil is using as an opportunity. I have to look to grow spiritually. If I don't pray, what is my plan to pray more? If I don't study my Bible, what is my plan to read more? How am I connecting with Christians? What is my plan to get more connected? I need to make a specific one. And if you're struggling with that, please know everyone else is too. That's why we have shepherds here who are there to shepherd your soul, to guide you, to help you. Knowing that wolves are out there looking, the shepherds will guide and protect you. And really, that's what this comes down to. God hasn't left us alone. Even in the here and now, even with all the good examples and the bad examples, with all the discouragement and all the encouragement, we are to look around. And we're to work together on this. God is in control. We need to remember the Lord who is great and awesome. We need to know that our God will fight our battles. We need to know our God is better than that judge who is selfish and gets the widow just off his back. Our God will speedily grant justice on his time schedule. But in the here and now, we're going to work together. Notice Nehemiah in chapter 5. One of his best examples as an individual leader. A good challenge for us to follow is in Nehemiah 5 and verse 15. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. You notice in verse 16, all my servants and I, Nehemiah says, were gathered for the work. In verse 17, 18, and 19, he's encouraging God, remember what I have done. What has he done? He has not laid something on the people that was too much. This is doable. We can accomplish great things. We can grow. Adversity doesn't have to be trying to knock you down. It can just be keeping you from getting up. And that's what you see in Nehemiah 4. Sanballat and Tobiah, they're coming for the people. But they're able to build the wall anyway. Did that stop Sanballat and Tobiah? No. They plotted all the more. Did the fact that the people of Judah were saying, give up, stop them? No. Why? Because Nehemiah led the people to do right anyway. Nehemiah prayed to God. He was aware of what the dangers were, and so he made a specific plan tailored to their needs to fix it. And they didn't just say, we're going to be better. They worked together. Read with me one final passage in Nehemiah 4 and verse 14 again. After he has stationed them in verse 13 in specific spots with specific weaponry. In verse 14, I looked and arose and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. He didn't just give them a specific plan. He didn't just tell them to have faith in God. He gave them a purpose for that plan to be executed. Think about the impact you're having. I need to think about the impact that my light can have. Jesus says, let your light shine before others so they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. I leave an impact, whether I think I do or not. I'm like that one stone cast into the lake, and the ripples go out far greater in length than where the rock hits the water. Who am I impacting? Who could I impact better? Who can I serve? Who can I love? Who can I be a good example for? Nehemiah showed one good example can make all the difference. We're blessed with so many wonderful examples in our life. Look around and be thankful for elders. Be thankful for deacons. Be thankful for the Bible class teachers this morning that you had in class, in the kids' classes. Be thankful for all the work that goes on the walls. Be thankful for all the servants behind the scenes, in front of the stage. Be thankful. But realize that every pew has a heart that's broken, a heart that needs help. And we can do that. That's part of God's plan, is that you and I work together. Look with me at one final passage, and the lesson will be yours in the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. We urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. Can we overcome adversity? Of course we can. We need to look to God. God is the one who gives the answers. We need to look to the fact that there is dangers out there. And so I need to have a plan to fix it. And part of that plan needs to incorporate help. Help that God has given us. Take the help. Be thankful for it. If you're not a Christian, recognize that the help that God offers to remember he's great and awesome is to also remember we owe everything to him. And that without the sacrifice of Jesus, without that blood coming into contact with our sin, we are stuck. So how can we access it? Believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Confess him as Lord, repent of your sins, and be baptized. Share in the most significant event in the world's history, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You can have your sins washed away this very morning. Or maybe you're a Christian and it's hard to always remember the Lord is great and awesome when Sanballat and Tobiah are out there looking for you. When people are looking to pull you down, it's easy to focus on that and not focus on how wonderful God is. But there are Christians here who can help you regain focus. We'll pray with you. We'll pray for you. You can know where your soul will be